first, congrats on your new role. And you mentioned it's a long title. So tell me a little bit of your title and what that entails, the intent of this role and what you think that's going to be when you go into your organization.
Yeah, I think that so the title is Program Manager Organizational Readiness, and I think it's really going to be focused on where product meets the rest of the organization, which is an area where I have a lot of passion around, and really making sure that we're getting the rhythms right in terms of when things are ready with product and how that impacts the rest of the organization, how it's communicated out to customers and prospects, when the go-to-market teams are ready with, a new package or pricing change, all of that kind of syncing up to the right timeline altogether.
That's really cool. So it's sort of like the launch readiness, and you will be, I assume, working with a lot of internal product teams and
Yes.
go-to-market team as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my understanding. It'd be very cross-functional and yeah, really like across the organization.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Previously, you've done a lot of different in the different roles, solving different challenges. So
Yeah.
maybe it would be great to also share a little bit of context of your previous roles and challenges you've gone through running products and portfolio and driving outcomes.
Yeah. So previous, I was a senior product operations manager at Xywave. I moved into the role actually from customer success, which I think other product ops people also come in through that venue as well. But it's been a unique viewpoint that I have because I do think I approach it much more from that cross-functional mindset than necessarily like a true like product management vision because I didn't come from a product management background.
Right.
And I think to me, in terms of like challenges that I see, I do think that that's one of the challenges that I've noticed is where all of that comes together and kind of translating the strategy across the organization. And I think that's a role that product operations can really play to help really drive that execution across the business and taking that kind of vision into how it actually gets executed.
Right. It's actually very interesting time for your role and then the challenges you've gone through. The reason is because nowadays people think, oh, okay, you can build products so much faster. You can using AI to prototype, you can AI to analyze customer insights, you can use AI to, obviously coding and everything is just so much faster. But then on the other hand, you also have challenges of the product land on the hands of the customers. So your role seems very fitting for that. So where
Yeah.
do you see some of the challenges in or opportunities you think that we could be driving for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it's funny that you say that about everything moving faster. I think I saw a post on LinkedIn this week that it's like you can also move so fast in the wrong direction that you end up, delivering the wrong thing completely. So I think there's definitely a balance, right? And I think that one of the challenges that I've seen related to that is really in how you communicate that future plan to customers and also internally as well. And really creating that kind of like roadmap coherence. I think that's a huge opportunity we have to really get that right and improve how that works. But it's definitely a challenge too.
So how do you see why is it a challenge in terms of the,
Yeah.
coherence?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is like there's this friction that happens with the timing. So you have all of these other like leaders, marketing, sales, they want really clear timelines. Marketing wants to be able to plan out their entire year. Well, being able from a product perspective to deliver a very specific date until you get much closer to that delivery is really challenging. And so I think that that's where that challenge comes into place is how do you get that right balance of not overcommitting, not under informing to really be able to build a clear picture though?
Right. So what I'm hearing you're saying is the tension of speed and changes that often happens on the product side that don't necessarily vibe well with some of the longer timeline and plan needed in other functions. Actually, you actually brought up something very interesting that I've seen personally is that when you try to do a marketing events or promotion or something, you have to plan ahead of time, you get a venue, can do a lot of things to make sure that's ready. And therefore you do need to make sure that the product and others are aligned to it. So when the topic of the star, it will line up to it. I think it definitely something leading to it as well. So how do you see that's being managed today that solving or addressing this challenge?
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of like balance and give and take. So I think that part of it is, product and engineering have a responsibility to get better at that estimation, quite frankly. And be able to get close at least to what that delivery date might be. And I think especially in like a SaaS environment, other departments need to get more comfortable with some of that uncertainty. And I think it's more of like almost like cultural, right? In terms of like how do we communicate together? Which is harder to say, like, here's the very like standard operating way that it can happen very well in every single company, because I think there is so much nuance there in terms of that communication that really might be organization specific and the people involved specific.
Right. You brought up something interesting about communicating. And, I also heard sometimes that either you can use the word of visibility or really people get a clarity on what is going on. So if I were to say, sometimes you hear PM say, hey, I do alignment and updates and all the things, right? Slack and others, but why people still feel like they're surprised by changes. Have you gone into that? How do you manage that challenge?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think that you definitely get that. And I think especially as you get into a more complex environment, you know, a portfolio environment, lots of different products, it gets so much harder. And I think one of the things that I find is that from a product manager perspective, they're living in that product all day, 24/7, right? Your go-to-market team, there might be touching, multiple different products, multiple different things. And so it is a lot for them to kind of keep up to date on. And so, I think that there is like a level of, I don't know, just like reiteration that needs to happen, frankly, and helping meet people where they are. And sometimes that delivery method needs to change. I like that you brought up like doing a Slack message. I think that that's actually, I think one of the more successful things that I've seen to really keep people informed, because you can post it over here and say you have to go over here and this is where all the release notes are. But being able to just like send a quick, message, that's really immediate for people to be able to kind of read and not necessarily take action on in the moment. But I think that type of immediacy is really helpful to folks. And I have noticed that.
Right. So you said something interesting is to um, meet where people are, right? If and even better is to say, if I want to know something, if I can find that right away when I need to,
Mhm.
it's really critical because, like you said, the go-to-market team having a lot of other things going on, right? So they are probably crossing multiple products. For the PMs, it's different, like different context. The
Yeah.
truth is the same, right? It's just different context for different people,
Yes.
so it's difficult to find it.
Yeah.
And so have you, like, in terms of mechanism of communication or tracking, what are some of the things you've been using and that's been sort of successful? What are some of the things you tried that weren't really working very well?
In terms of like not working well, I think that I'll take like full ownership of this, that I was definitely like a build it and they will come type person. So we built a space and it's like, here's where you can find all of, the release notes information. Here's the roadmap. We have it planned out. We're building all this transparency. I'm giving you all the information. But it wasn't necessarily fully meeting that need for folks because it didn't meet them where they were. And so I think instead shifting to more of that kind of instantaneous messaging, type of action, we have found more success with. That's been helping keep people more up to date. It's still not perfect, right? And I think that in addition to just keeping so much information straight, your go-to-market teams are also they're working with customers every day. They have different timelines. They might, a salesperson's trying to close the deal. So them trying to keep everything in their brain, I think is just an unrealistic expectation too.
No, that's why you have it in the system versus in the brain,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
We've seen that a lot, right? So there's a 0 to 1 product
Hmm.
where especially in today, anything's easy, so easy to build. You can just do a prototype, you vibe coding it, and use whatever mechanism to push to production. Now, once you get things to live, it start to become the work actually is a lot more, right? So there are not just the initial launch, there are other things you have to work on. And then what are some of the challenges you've seen? I think, obviously when we chatted earlier, you mentioned a little bit on in our sort of the exchange async, right?
Yeah.
Around some of the long tail implications and
Yes.
pricing and all that. How often do you see product organization running to it? And then why it's important for them to think about this earlier in their product roadmap and our plan?
Yeah. You're so right. There's so many things that you're doing on the front end to get ready for that launch, but there are other things that happen past that as well. There's additional like system alignment that often needs to happen. And again, especially when you're in a more like portfolio environment where, the environments I'm used to, there's different, suites of products with different tiers, and all of that creates a level of complexity when it comes to your packaging, your pricing, how do the go-to-market teams are selling that is above and beyond the features that product is shipping in the product. It's that kind of additional layer of here's everything that's available, but there's different components that, customers are buying. And so that long tail work is continuing to make sure that that's all very clear. And all of that is aligned and that the marketing messages are connected to the value that, product plan to deliver. And that's the same language that sales is speaking or in customer success when they're working with the customers too.
Right. And that actually brought up something very interesting. At Dragonboat, we have a concept of PDLC. We didn't invent the concept. It's been around forever, right? Product development life cycle.
Yeah.
But what we brought into product management practice is that it is not step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a
Mhm.
parallel track
Yeah.
on all of that, right? So, for example, you mentioned the pricing and packaging. If we
Hmm.
would start to think about this at the time we're gonna release, it's too late,
Too
right?
late.
It
Yeah.
actually should coming at the very beginning to
Yes.
say,
Yeah.
how does who's gonna buy what is the value prop?
Yep.
So that you build into the product already the hooks or flags or whatever way that will be carried through, right? So that's like
Yeah.
I think very even today. I was someone sent a note about, oh, there's a proposal for product to market called Cursor for PMs. You can
Mm.
get customer feedback, you can adoption data, and then you start writing code and get through. And I was like, that's a great thinking, but your customers is not just represent as a piece of feedback, or maybe even 100 pieces of feedback. You
Yeah.
still have to operate on your existing product, your existing
Yes.
strategy, and the dependencies and things you need from other teams.
Yeah.
That including more than just engineers and product managers. Go to
Right.
market could have limitations in various forms and business compliance and so forth. So
Yeah.
maybe it will be good to hear from you. Like if you're seeing either good stories, things that work out well, like it saved the day, or things that didn't work so well that we found and then learned something would be awesome to hear.
Yeah, I think that that's so true about that there's constraints, right? Based on all those different inputs. And sometimes even within product, right? Because there might be multiple product teams that there's dependencies between those and their different priorities might not fully align to when you might want, to plan to deliver something. So I think that from like a successful standpoint, I think what I've seen is that you still need some type of like decision forum. I think of like a live meeting, frankly, where you have to be able to like align all of those pieces together. Building like the documentation and the process is so important, but you still need some type of way to really build that alignment. And the best way that I've still found to do that is having, a forum where you're bringing together all those right stakeholders to make sure that you're really planning towards that shared outcome.
Right. I totally agree with you. I think in the end, the way I want to call it is a heterogeneous way of data, as well as the inputs, as well as the way we collaborate and work together. And to your point, sometimes you have to, not sometimes, you almost always to have the information somewhere, right? So people can find it.
Yeah,
But we cannot possibly document everything, anything on paper, so
yeah,
that, and also as you live have discussions, there will be new information context, right? We're all using AI, we can say context because that's really relevant. The
yeah.
context will come up that wasn't documented. And I think that's so important to understand the need of, it will be async
Mhm.
communication and also the real time
Yeah.
collaboration. And then ideally that also is captured so that you can say, oh, okay, that
Mhm.
is the reason why we go this way or the other way. Because to your
Yeah.
point, if we don't have this somewhere, you know,
Yeah.
it's confusing down the road, and now they're not in the
Yes.
meetings that we're getting in the road. So I totally hear you.
Yeah.
Also mentioned something very interesting, which is the have a different perspectives. So I think
Mm.
the like the go-to-market team maybe look at a slightly different angle from a product manager's looking at the same customer or same product feature or problem. So
Hmm.
that is also something where I seen companies struggle or teams struggle as you work with both sides. What are some of the things you noticed, and how do you solve that? Would providing visibility is the one form or other ways that you see not enough and something else need to happen?
I'll be honest, I think it's something that's still often a struggle and a challenge. I don't know that I've like found the right like perfect unlock, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, because I think there is just so much nuance there. Um, I think that one of the things that is very successful is, I mean, I'm going to go back to like meeting people where they are. You have teams that are operating in different tools, right? And so the more that you can streamline that and create connectors between them, I think, in the world where we are now with AI, there's so much unlock there that really can build and drive some efficiency so that some of that becomes way less manual than it was, even 2 years ago, frankly. That really, I think, still allows people to use the tools that they need to do in their, specific instances. But instead of having to like rebuild everything, like rebuild that same documentation, the same value proposition over and over again in different formats.
Right. That's a really good call out in a way where the teams work in different functions, work in different perspective and different tools, but you have to connect them together. We call it put on the same boat, but
Yeah.
obviously that's the it just people on the same boat, it won't work, right? You have to be on the same water. So that's
Yes.
that's
Yeah. I love that analogy.
That's actually why Jack will come around really is to say, hey, you could be working in Salesforce, you could be in
Mhm.
working in, HubSpot, whatever, Jira
Yeah.
and whatnot. But in the end, that need to, in some extent, all have to come to the product part of the world, right? Because, customer has a lens and, engineering obviously is a big lens, but most of the stuff people are talking about today, they're like so much put product in the engineering box. And I think that's one of the biggest problem because even engineering mostly being automated. So why is it products to live in the engineering mindset versus getting broader in go-to-market pricing and packaging and else? How do you bring that in?
I think you see that the most, successful product management organizations and product managers are doing that, right? And they
Right.
do wear that business hat and are really looking at that very holistically.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned some of the things about the translation layer, right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more of, there's a visibility, there's a sharing, and there's a translation. So how do you see, what's your definition?
It's it, everyone has their own priorities, which is expected, right?
Right,
And everyone is going to have a little bit different language. We're all looking for the same thing ultimately, right? Like
right.
we want our users to love the product. We want them to stay with the product. We want them to buy more of the product. So we're all like moving in that same big outcome. But the way we get there, the words that we might be using along that journey are slightly different. And so to me, I think that like translation layer, and this is where I think particularly in like a product operations role that's really cross-functional can really help is to really kind of create that shared language to say let's create those kind of shared outcomes that we're working towards and then use some commonality and common language around that because I think what I've seen is that when you don't do that, even something small, like a small misalignment, can really kind of snowball over time to really cause big problems, especially. You gave that example of like you have the big event and you have the space booked. And so all of these small little incremental misalignments over time
Right.
could really have a big impact later on down the road if you're not getting really clear.
Interesting point about prioritization. And,
Yeah.
because we all time towards the same outcome, which is happy customer, use the product and, renew and pay product and so forth. But they're all competing.
Hmm.
They're not always like they're all the same thing if you want to do all of that, right? And how have you seen that teams and cross-functional teams and product teams manage that type of competing priorities because they all have a different perspective slightly?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that to me is one of those things that I think is like a very real challenge. And I would love to hear from anyone that's like, I have really fully solved this, because I do think that that is one of the big challenges. And I think it comes down again to having that right type of like shared language and a place to be able to hash it out essentially, right? If you have the visibility and everybody knows like what the plan is, what we're planning on delivering, what we're planning on building, what those expectations are, but then you also have in parallel that place where further discussion and collaboration can happen. That's really, I think, the unlock to be able to help further prioritize to say, this is from a product perspective, this is really important to our users. All of our feedback data is telling us this. We've, done all the analysis. But our go-to-market teams are saying, well, I'm hearing something different. And that to me, I think is where you have that opportunity to better prioritize that for the broader needs of the business.
Right. The part is very common we run into. And I don't think that there is a perfect solution, but if we have a perfect data, there is obvious solution because it's
Yeah,
optimization game, right?
sure.
If we
Yeah,
put all the inputs in, that optimization is fairly easy to do. I
yeah.
think the challenge is that we don't have the data. There's no place hosting data, or there's, the um, people resist, people think about like, I still gonna say, right? Product management mostly today running their business as if they're running on punch cards, right? Because look, punch card is probably even a better of it. What do they use? There's nothing used for decisions. Well, unless you use Dragonboat, obviously, but
Yeah.
otherwise, right? So they don't see it. They
Mhm.
think it's, that's my biggest frustration to say, hey guys, like how
Yeah.
can we make data-driven decisions? Now, obviously, that's not my call. So I want to hear you. What are the things you feel frustrated and you want to cover that is really obvious that the what people not using it or not doing it. Tell me some.
That's a good question. I love that about like the data piece. I think it's easy too to get overwhelmed with data. There's a ton of different analytics that you can look at, right, in terms of how people are, adopting and using the product and especially like when you have multiple products and a larger portfolio, you can almost get inundated with the amount of different things and like levers that you're trying to pull and work towards. And so what I do think is most helpful, and especially thinking about working with your go-to-market teams that I've really advocated for is like let's start with simplicity, right? Like let's choose one metric that we think is the right one. If it's tied to, your value metric and how you're selling the product, even better. If it's something else that we think is, just a really great adoption metric, this is the key indicator to say users are using the product well. Great. Start there and really align. And I think it really comes back to like always bringing that back to say, here's where we are, here's the benchmark. We released these features or we did this launch and this was the impact. And it's not always easy necessarily to like draw that through line, but I do think that that's really critical. And like I said, I think it's starting first with trying to keep it as simple as possible to help people realize that importance of being data driven.
Very sound advice in terms of start with something and
Mhm.
adjust from that, right? I think
Yeah.
the tendency is because the people cannot align and you start to adding more things that become like inaction, right? So
Yes.
I definitely seeing this happens that people spend a month or quarters to debate on what are try to get a perfect set versus the other way to say, regardless, this seems to be something useful. We can pick that metric just one, and then we can always add to it. I think that's hopefully we're moving away from that. I've seen companies having a lot more data,
Mhm.
especially with the product ops, better product practices,
Yep.
and then we're seeing more usage of, various metrics and data to understand how we're performing so that like the earlier example you mentioned earlier, say product manager has feedback that's different from a go-to-market team's
Yeah.
perspective. So
Yeah.
then you have to show, right? Something has a show, and then we can line on it. That really connect pieces together.
Mhm.
Now, in product ops, and in your note you mentioned earlier, is that the invisible work of product
Mhm.
ops. So tell a little bit of what you mean by that, and
Yeah.
how does it affect product team and in general the role of product ops.
I think that, and I don't think that this is unique to product operations. I think that, like in general, any type of like operations role, the marker of doing like a job well done is actually invisibility, is that everything is working as designed. There's, very little friction in the system.
Right.
But because of that, I think, some of the importance and what those like operators are doing behind the scenes, can sometimes be lost. And I think that particularly when organizations are, growing quickly or going through a big transformation or change, I think product operations can have a really important role in that invisible area to help create some of that like consistent process and systems thinking so that the organization can kind of go through that big change or that big growth as smoothly as possible. I mean, with a big change like that, or, hyper growth, hyper scaling, there's always going to be bumps. But I think that that's where that some of that complexity can kind of be smoothed out a little bit. And I think product operations can help create some of those systems, like I said, to really kind of like see around corners and help create what that plan should be with product and other departments to make sure that it's as smooth as possible from like that customer perspective. I'll give you like a more specific example maybe. So in my experience, I've worked in like companies that have acquired other companies. And then you have to often make product decisions, longer tail, right? Frequently of migrating customers, replatforming them. And so that can really like add some complexity. And you might think like, oh, that's just, product and engineering need to figure out how to do that. There's a lot of like communication that needs to happen and your go-to-market teams need to understand it. So they're aligned and using the same type of, value proposition language that, why product is making that change. And so I think a lot of that work is happening behind the scenes that you don't always see.
Ah, I see, I see, I see. So interestingly, you mentioned that because I think it's the organizational maturity thing,
Mhm.
right? Most
Yeah.
people think if I have a Jira ticket, that's a visibility. If I don't have a Jira ticket, then that's
Yeah.
not visibility. But the reality is 90% of the product work, it does not require Jira ticket. I'm just gonna highlight 90% of the work required to have a product to drive outcome does not require Jira ticket or engineering.
Mm.
So they're not invisible. It's how we communicate and make known, like you said. If we were to say we're
Mm.
going to migrate customers, that's a initiative where we
Sure.
migrate customers, have a communications and all that, right? But
Mhm.
if we won't raise that visibility to broader audience, then it feels like invisible in some ways, but it is one of the most visible thing outside to the customer to say, oh, this
Yeah.
product changed. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
Like support tickets or emails or open rates or all of that stuff or bad PR or good PR, NPS, all those things are very critical. And I think to your
Hmm.
point, I think one of the things work with the product ops, some of the ops people is that they so much about helping the product teams, right? That the critical job they do in addition to helping product teams may not be as highlighted, but I would almost say that you want to make sure this is visible because it's not about you, it's about a customer, right? It's,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
a good. Yeah.
but I think that's a good example to in the organizational is that people tend to hear like, oh, we launched this product and we did this, whatever. Like, but that's just the beginning of you creating value.
Yeah.
Everything leading up to launching a product is only cost.
Yeah.
Like people really have to think about it. Anything leading up to having the product to market
Mhm.
is cost. Only
Yeah.
the thing happen afterwards could become revenue,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
if we're only looking at the things coming up to the cost,
Hmm.
we're looking at the wrong metric.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because I think, in your new role will be driving the visibility even broader to your organization. But I do agree, like in today's world, I think sometimes, I was talking to another product ops at, I'm not naming companies, one of the top tech companies out there, the challenge they have is now they can ship so much faster
Hmm.
so much faster to the point their sales and their marketing, customer success and support, they are all have a lot of complaints and struggles
Mm,
because they haven't really figured out how to communicate to the customer. How
sure.
do you describe the value prop? So then
Yeah.
there's such a huge scramble there.
Hmm.
And that's the bottleneck.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
bottleneck to outcome, right? The outcome is not shipping the product.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to, I think something you said earlier in terms of like the capacity, right? Like you're constrained by the capacity, not just of product and engineering to deliver, but all of these other like internal teams to absorb it and your customers too to absorb that change too.
Yeah, yeah, it's just so true, so true. In your experience, you're running to, right? Regardless, it's the visibility or alignment of bringing things up to the customer. What are some of the things that you think that we should change now, given, everything else is happening in the market and AI and others? What are the things you think we should change? And what are the things you think that we would keep the same?
I'm debating as to whether this is a change or a keep, but I think what's so
Right.
important is even though we can build and ship so much faster, I think that what is important to keep is still that data mindedness that you had indicated early on in terms of like really making sure that what we're building is the right thing. Like just because I think just because you can build it so much faster doesn't mean that you should. And I think that that's connected, right, to the conversation you just shared, where it's like our go-to-market teams can't keep up with all the change and they can't communicate it to customers. I mean, that to me begs the question of like, well, then why? Like, what's the purpose of delivering all of this if you're kind of failing essentially on that launch and the continued kind of like making sure your customers are understanding and comprehending the value that you're building in because ultimately you want to get credit for it, right? Like why add all this stuff if you're not getting credit from your users and your customers that it's like you made my life better.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to say like I guess that's a stay the same because I think it's still we need to still be use those good product management practices of using data and making those decisions to build the best next thing.
Right. I think, yeah, I hear you. It's both a changing in where the bottleneck is.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
the real outcome is still what we're looking for, which is does it make the customers getting the value and that they understand they get a value versus just dump a ton of changes, right?
Yes.
The
Yeah.
funny thing
Yeah.
is that features are both a value or changes that may not
Yes.
be valuable if they don't know what to do with it, right?
Totally. Yes. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think our time is up. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed the conversation. Is there any
Yeah.
final takeaway you want to add
No,
before?
I mean, I don't think so. No, this was a great conversation and I appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Okay, cool. Well, congratulations on your new role. It's gonna be a
Thanks.
fun ride, sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.